Hello and welcome. Today we have with us the amazing Sarah Laver, and Sarah is now a BANT registered nutritionist and registered nutritional therapist, specialising in assisted conception support and fertility. She's the founder of the Embryologist Nutritionist, helping couples, single females, regain control of their fertility and maximise their chances of a healthy pregnancy. So some of the work she does is really, really amazing. And I guess, firstly, welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Jess. It's really lovely to be on here and chatting to you. So thank you for the invite.
No, wonderful. And I guess just to start off, it'll be great to hear a little bit more about your background and how you kind of got into doing what you do now. And yeah, a little bit about your own journey.
Okay, yeah, very welcome to, very happy to share that. So my journey is a little bit different to a lot of nutritionists. So quite often, nutritionists that work in a specific field like fertility have got their own particular fertility journey. Mine is a little bit different because I actually used to be an embryologist. So I used to work in IVF clinics throughout the UK. And so I experienced working in the lab and seeing the patients come through that situation. And I was dealing with the eggs, the embryos, the sperm on a daily basis. And when I left that profession a while ago, eventually I decided to retrain in nutrition, and it was just a natural progression for me, for my niche to be in fertility and being able to support those couples, but just from a slightly different angle. It was in that period of time in between finishing working in the IVF labs and studying nutrition, that's when I was learning more about the impact that nutrition really can have on the whole body in so many ways. And fertility is just another one of those ways. So it's great to be able to support clients to optimize their chances of IVF success if they are going down that route. But if they are trying to conceive just naturally, it's optimizing their chances of success naturally as well.
Yeah, wonderful. That's really interesting. And yeah, super qualified, because I know you studied both psychology and personalized nutrition. I wonder what made you decide to go down the more nutrition route and take that avenue.
I think when I first started studying the psychology, I find the science of behavior and understanding what makes people tick just fascinating. It always has fascinated me, and that's what drove me into doing the psychology. And I think the things that I learned through that help me currently in my nutrition business, because it's very easy for a nutritionist when working with a client to say, right, you need to do A, B, C. It's very difficult for that person to then go away often and implement those changes and those recommendations. So understanding the psychology tools I've gained have helped me to understand how to support people to implement those changes in the best way. And if they find they are coming up against some road bumps, it's how to circumnavigate those. So I started the psychology first, but then why I ended up carrying on with the nutrition, because that's when I learned so much. Initially, it was about how nutrition can support mental health. When I was training for psychology, I was doing a lot of running myself and listening to lots of podcasts. And one of my favorite ones that your listeners may know about is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, Feel Better, Live More. Yeah. And I remember hearing him interview somebody called Dr. Felice Jacka over in Australia. And she was talking about nutrition and the impact on depression and mental health. And it really just got me so fascinated with the power of nutrition and nutrients. And that then led into me sort of studying it and understanding more about the role with fertility as well. But the psychology definitely helps to support my practice by me understanding more how to direct people to sort of implement all these recommendations.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and particularly with fertility being such a sensitive topic, I can imagine that those skills that you pick up with communication can just be so helpful for your clients as well.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to know a bit more about the work you do. So for your work with nutrition, so for listeners who may know nothing at all, why is nutrition so helpful for fertility? How are the two so interrelated?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows, and they'll have heard on the news, and everyone understands that nutrition can be very helpful in terms of things like cardiovascular disease. So we know that altering your nutrition can impact on the health of the cells in your body. The sperm and the egg are just two other types of differentiated cell. There's still a cell in the body. The egg is a rather large one, but it's still just a single cell. Yeah. So why can't nutrition also impact on those cells and their functioning? And it really, really can. I was just at the Fertility Show, which is an annual show in London, which brings together different IVF clinics and different therapies that can support people through their fertility journey. And there was some talk there of how nutrition can't really impact egg and sperm quality, but we know that that's not the case. There have been so many studies showing now that it really can help. The egg and the sperm are very vulnerable cells when they're developing, and they can be influenced quite significantly if there is a picture of inflammation in the body. And inflammation can come from many guises. It can develop from poor nutrition, from a poor diet, from a stressful environment, from somebody over-exercising, from the toxins around us. So there can be some kind of inflammatory effect in the body, and that could then potentially have a negative impact on the developing eggs and sperm. And that could lead to something called oxidative stress, which this process has the chance to damage the DNA in the egg and the sperm. And if there are little breaks in the DNA in the egg and the sperm, that's then going to impact their chances of developing onto successful fertilization and a successful healthy pregnancy. So by supporting somebody's nutrition when they're trying to conceive, you're going to be working towards supporting any inflammation that's there, supporting the health and the quality of the DNA in the egg and the sperm. And some people aren't aware, obviously, there's a lot of women that take medications such as the oral contraceptive pill from a youngish age or through their 20s into their 30s. But one thing that not many people are aware of when they're doing that is that it potentially can deplete the body of a lot of nutrients.
Oh, wow.
Some of your B vitamins, zinc, many nutrients. And so when someone then comes off the oral contraceptive pill because they want to start their own family, they don't realize that their body is quite depleted already. And so it's really important to be putting in that good nutrition so that those levels of nutrients can be restored, because they're all vital for the healthy functioning of our hormones, as I say, for the production of DNA, which when you conceive and when you are growing a pregnancy, the amount of DNA that needs to be produced is immense. You're growing a baby, so you want to be optimizing all of that. And different dietary patterns as well can impact on someone's nutritional intake. So if somebody follows a vegan diet, it's important that they're aware of the nutrients that they may not be getting so much of from their diets, and therefore may need to be supplementing on top of that, or being very, very wise and careful about getting them from their diet themselves.
Well, that's so interesting. And I had no idea about the contraceptive pill depleting you of particular nutrients as well, which I think just goes to show how little information we have surrounding forms of contraception. But I guess on that, what would kind of be your, I know everyone's obviously different, but what would be your major do's and don'ts with regards to nutrition for fertility clients?
So it's making sure that one of the first things I would say to people, which I'm sure your listeners will have heard before, is the rainbow spectrum of fruit and vegetables. Eat the rainbow, and it is touted around a lot, but there is a lot of importance for that. And it's because the different colors of those fruit and vegetables, those plant chemicals, all contain that they have great antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. And so I mentioned before that we may have different levels of inflammation in the body. And so by eating the spectrum of the different colors, you're going to be putting great nutrients, minerals, vitamins, but also these antioxidant chemicals in your body, which is going to help that. Eating foods that contain omega-3 is very, very important. So omega-3 is an essential fatty acid that we need to get from our diet. The main source of that is in oily fish, which isn't to everybody's taste. Some people, I've had clients that just refuse to eat oily fish, they don't like it.
Yeah.
And in those situations, or if somebody doesn't eat fish at all for other reasons, then it's important to consider whether you need to supplement with that, because the omega-3s again have an anti-inflammatory action. So our bodies need some kind of inflammation and an inflammatory response. If you hurt yourself, your body needs to be able to react to that. But it's all a case of balance. So you need to be able to balance any inflammation with the anti-inflammatory side. And then there's one other nutrient that, or it's a food group really, that I discuss a lot with my clients that many people, especially women, don't eat enough of, and that is protein. So protein is just so important. We all associate it with muscles, but it's also really important for many factors in our body, including our hormones. And a lot of people struggle, especially at breakfast time, with protein. And you know, if you have a piece of meat or fish at your lunch or your dinner time, then the chances are you're getting a good amount of protein at those meals. But quite often at breakfast time, the levels of protein intake might fall a little bit short. And protein is also very good at balancing blood sugar, which again is something that if somebody has an imbalanced blood sugar, this could negatively impact on fertility, but it also sets you up for a roller coaster throughout the day of feeling very fatigued, and then you're reaching for some foods that potentially you don't want. We wouldn't be advising eating, like the very highly processed chocolate bars and sweets and sugary foods, and it sends you off on this roller coaster of blood sugar highs and lows. But having a good amount of protein in your breakfast starts the day off on a much more balanced level.
Yeah, definitely. What kind of recommendations would you give as like a good breakfast idea for people then? Perhaps, I know eggs is normally the usual the usual advice, but it's, say perhaps if you didn't like eggs, or what kind of recommendations would you give to people who are struggling to really even eat breakfast, let alone get that protein intake in early on in the day?
Yeah, as you say, eggs is a great option if someone is eating eggs. If not, chia seeds, they contain a good amount of protein, and you can make a chia pudding, which is a bit like when people talk about overnight oats. It's mixing your milk of choice, whether that's dairy or whether it's plant-based, with some chia seeds, and you can add berries and different things to it. But that's one source of protein. People could have a smoothie where you can include lots of different antioxidant-rich berries or spinach, avocado to get some healthy fats. But then you can add in some nuts or nut butter, or even a good quality protein powder, so that you're getting some protein in, especially if someone doesn't feel like they can sit down and eat a meal at breakfast, or if they're in a rush, then that's something that they can take with them. But also people don't really think of having meat at breakfast time, but that's just because that's our culture, I suppose. You think breakfast should be sweet, but you could have leftovers from the day before for your breakfast. So it's just sort of trying to think of all the different options that you've got, but do trying to increase the protein at breakfast is a great idea.
Yeah, no, that's a really helpful tip. Thank you so much. And I know also a lot of your work, you don't just focus on nutrition, so you're a lot more of a holistic approach in order to support fertility in general. I'd love to know a bit more about that and kind of the work you do surrounding all aspects of someone's life, as opposed to just isolating nutrition.
Yeah, that's a great question, because people think of a nutritional therapist as you're only focused on the nutrition side. And we know that there are so many factors that can impact on somebody's health. And, you know, our root aim is to understand what is leading to somebody's situation. And so looking at their lifestyle is really, really important. And unfortunately, we all live in a world now where it's unavoidable to not be exposed to some kind of stress every day. I know Rangan Chatterjee, he calls these micro stressors, that we have builds up of micro stressors. That might be looking at your phone first thing in the morning and seeing emails that you've got to respond to. Being woken up by an alarm clock is a little stress on your body. So lots of these can mount up throughout the day. And then that's not even considering the slightly larger stresses that people do experience: emotional, psychological, financial stresses. And And stress, whether it is physical or whether it's psychological, our bodies react in the same way. So your stress hormones called cortisol rise within the body. And what we would ideally want is that to be short-lived. But when there's these constant micro stresses all the time, then the levels of cortisol might stay raised a little bit longer than we would be wanting. And historically, we would be using that stress response to be able to escape some danger. And in those times, you don't need to digest your food because you're running away. You don't need to procreate because you're running away from whatever danger it is. But nowadays, when you're just sat at your desk and you're stressed because there's so many emails landing in your inbox and someone's wanting you to do something yesterday, then, you know, the levels of cortisol stay high. That still has the same impact on you. So your digestion will still be slowing down. Your reproductive system will still not be functioning as effectively because the body it hasn't changed how it reacts to the stress hormone cortisol. And so that's one way that a stressful lifestyle could negatively impact on fertility. So it's really important. We can't avoid stresses, but it's important to try and address, are there any that we can minimize? And for the ones that we can't, what kind of strategies can we put in place to deal with those effects of that? And I mean, I say to my clients, it could be as simple as popping to the toilet a few times a day, as we all do. And whilst you're there, just doing 5 minutes of breathing exercises to place the body in what we call the rest and digest phase. So it's the parasympathetic phase of our nervous system. It's the calming one. That's where we want to be. But quite often you might find that you're feeling really tense, and actually that's just how you spend most of your day. So it's important to just take little snapshots out of the day, do some breathing techniques, which you can find lots of them on the internet, just to put yourself in that calm phase. So that's one part of lifestyle. Sleep is another really important area that quite often gets missed.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. Again, people working long hours, but also you're exhausted. So you get home from work, you put Netflix on, Amazon Prime, whatever, and you just get stuck into a series, and you just end up staying up later than you want to, or you meant to rather. And then your alarm's still going off early in the morning and you haven't had much sleep. But sleep, it's not a passive thing that goes on. It's a very active phase. We all think it's passive, nothing happens when I'm asleep. But actually, that's when the body is really busy clearing up everything that's been going on throughout the day, tidying up, you could say. And so it's really important to be aiming for between 7 and 9 hours of sleep every night, and having a consistent sleep schedule, because again, this cortisol hormone, the stress hormone that I mentioned, has an opposite effect to our sleepy hormone, melatonin. And so melatonin levels that make us feel tired, they will only start to rise when the cortisol level falls down. So if cortisol stays elevated because we've had a stressful day, we've come home and something stressed us in the evening, or we've had a bad trip home in the car, on the train, which is quite often nowadays with the strikes. But if cortisol stays high, that's going to start to prevent the melatonin rising. And again, blue light also does that. So blue light, the brain thinks it's still daytime. So the blue light coming from our screens. And if we're on screens late in the evening, that again is going to suppress the melatonin secretion, and that could negatively impact on sleep. So that's another thing that I talk to my clients about. So it's sort of looking at their stress levels, looking at their sleep patterns. And exercise is an interesting one, because exercise is great, it's good, but it's that word, it's balance. Everything is to do with balance. So over exercising is not great for fertility. Under exercising and doing nothing and being very sedentary is also not great for fertility. So it's finding the right level for that individual, what they can fit into their daily schedule, and what they feel comfortable doing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really key as well. That balance is super important. And particularly with regards to over exercising, I think there's also that tendency to be so health driven that you end up just wearing your body down. But I think, are there certain kinds of exercises or different methods that you would recommend to people who want to focus on life fertility?
It's very, very individualized.
Yeah.
So it really depends on someone's situation, and what their body is used to doing. So someone who's used to doing a lot of exercise, it would be counterintuitive probably to say, right, just do some yoga, because then that's going to stress them out even more, that they can't get their fix as they were doing. So it's working with the individual to find what's right for them. But yoga is a very good exercise to try and incorporate potentially, because it's been shown in numerous studies to counter the effects of cortisol and to help with relaxation. And there's also specific types of yoga for fertility. And so the moves that they incorporate can improve the blood flow in the pelvic region, and can also be done in tune with their menstrual cycle. So based on where they are in their cycle, then there are different practices. And it's not something that I'm not a yoga teacher, I don't know a lot about it, but I do know that it can be done in tune with their menstrual cycle. And so there would definitely be, that would be one avenue I would probably get people to look into. But even something just like going for a walk outside, you've had your meal, go for a 10-minute wander out in nature without your headphones in, without being on the phone, just outside, and do that every day. And that also has really positive impacts.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I think that's really good advice as well. I think you work as well with couples, and also, so how does that, I'd be interested to know how that dynamic kind of works, because I know a lot of the time the focus is on the female with regards to fertility, which is of course silly when, I mean, half of it is to do with the male if you're doing it in a heterosexual couple. So how do you kind of work with that dynamic, and how do you work with that through your practices, and how do you see that play out?
So as you say, it does, when you really think about it, it does make sense to focus on both the male and female, because unless someone's using donor sperm, then they're both involved. They're both bringing half the genetic material to the party, and you want to make sure that it's optimal for both of them. So when I carry out my work with a couple, it's having an in-depth initial consultation with them both, so I can understand their situations. And there's lots of investigations that the woman normally undergoes and undertakes at the outset, looking at her hormones, having ovarian scans. But for the male, there's normally just the one that they would tend to have, which is a semen analysis. And based on what those results come back, if they come back within normal parameters, that's normally where the investigations finish, because they're told everything's fine, you've got a normal number of sperm, they're moving, and they look great. But what we can't tell from a semen analysis is what's going on with the DNA of the sperm. And we know, as we've talked about in this chat today, that there are different factors that can influence the integrity of the DNA and could potentially be damaging it. And so there are tests which look at how much DNA damage is there in the sperm. And so that is one that I do find often that I am recommending to the male clients, because especially if there's maybe a history of recurrent pregnancy loss, then because sorry to explain for your listeners, so the biggest cause of early pregnancy loss is chromosomal errors. And so those could come from the female or the male. So if there was a situation with a couple that was their situation, then I would be wanting to investigate what the level of DNA fragmentation, it's called, is happening in the sperm sample. So that is, unfortunately, it's not something that's available on the NHS yet, so it is a private test, but that is one that I do feel is quite important to do. And if that was found to be slightly raised, then again, working through nutrition and particular supplementation that's appropriate, then that can help to counteract that DNA fragmentation. And men are very lucky in that every 3 months they get a new batch of sperm produced. And so changes that they make to their nutrition, to their lifestyle, then will be having an impact 3 months later. So their sperm is constantly being renewed. And so it's very doable to have a positive influence on the quality of sperm.
Yeah, and it just reaffirms what you were previously saying about nutrition being so important for fertility, because that DNA fragmentation, as you said, how the DNA is expressed is also so intertwined with nutrition. So I think that's super interesting and very important to kind of get both sides of the both the egg and the sperm donors to be focusing on their nutrition and their lifestyle as well. I know that you also work with IVF clients as well. Does that differ how you approach the fertility nutrition, or how does that play out in your practice?
Yeah, so with clients who are going through IVF or assisted conception treatments, quite often sometimes they have a shorter window, because if they've got an IVF treatment looming on the horizon, and you know, your listeners may hear people like myself talk about having a 3-month window, and I've mentioned about the sperm production being renewed a sperm batch being renewed every 3 months, but also it's the final 3 months of the maturation of the eggs, where they are particularly vulnerable to any impact from lifestyle, from nutrition. And so I wouldn't say the approach differs a huge amount in how I would work with someone who's trying to conceive naturally or going through an IVF procedure, but it just depends how much time you've got. There might be tests that I would recommend to carry out sooner, like the vaginal microbiome screening test, because we know that the bacterial balance in the vagina, which collectively is known as the microbiome, when that is a little bit out of balance, that can have a negative impact on conception and the chance of someone carrying a healthy pregnancy. And so I would probably want to investigate that maybe a little bit sooner in my relationship with a couple than I would do, say, if someone was trying to conceive naturally or didn't have the time pressure looming for them. But with IVF, you're essentially looking at the same things as someone who's trying to conceive naturally. You're looking at the quality of the eggs, the sperm, and the endometrium, so the environment. So it could also be looking at alternative therapies such as acupuncture to support the blood flow in the pelvic region as well, because there's a lot of evidence building behind that as being beneficial.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you've kind of provided quite a few different ways in which people seeking help with fertility can kind of go about making changes in their life to really optimize that chance of success, which I think is so key, and it was amazing work, I guess. And if people want to get in touch with you, then I'll attach all of your social links so that people can get in contact. But I guess as we kind of draw to the end, is there anything else that you kind of would want to say to the listeners with regards to fertility and nutrition and the work that you do?
I think it's really just to make small changes. So trying to make lots of changes all at once to your diet, to your lifestyle, it's very, very difficult to do. And that can then, somebody may fail at making those changes and then feel like they can't do anything. So it's pick one thing for this week, pick one change that you're going to make, and that could be increasing your number of vegetables at a mealtime by 1. So just have 1 extra portion of vegetables, and maintain that for a week. And then the next week, just pick one more thing to do. That might be going to bed half an hour earlier, even 10 minutes earlier. So that's what I think is really important. And to make these changes sustainable, is make them small, not massive changes.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really key as well, just in terms of maintaining that as a habit and really establishing that. So that's really good advice, because it can definitely feel overwhelming for people who are at the beginning of their health and even fertility journey. So I think that's really good advice. But I think that will draw us to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. And that was really insightful for our listeners as well. I think, as I said before, I will attach all of your socials. And if people want to get in touch with you further, I think, that's a really good space for you to provide additional advice to them.
Well, thank you, Jess. It's been lovely chatting to you, and I hope the listeners have enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Sarah.